The morning air at the international terminal was a cold, clinical blue. Sarah stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the ground crew maneuver around the silver belly of the private Embraer jet. In her hand, a cup of black coffee had long since gone lukewarm, but she gripped it like an anchor. She looked the part of the consummate professional, a tailored charcoal blazer, silk blouse, and hair swept back into a precise, unforgiving bun. This was the Sarah the world knew, the analyst who could dismantle a $1 billion budget with a single glance. But beneath the wool and silk, her skin was humming with a frequency only one man could hear. She felt him before she saw him. It was a shift in the air pressure, a familiar gravitational pull. Nate was 30 feet away, leaning against a marble pillar. To any other traveler, he was just a successful businessman checking his flight status, but Sarah saw the details that weren't in the corporate brochure. She saw the way his corporate blue polo, a shade he knew highlighted the slate gray of his eyes, stretched across the broad expanse of his chest. He had been working out. The fabric of his sleeves strained against his biceps as he shifted his weight. For 6 months they had played this game. In boardrooms across the city, they had exchanged glances that lasted a fraction of a second too long. They had shared working late sessions where the air between them became so thick with unspoken desire it was hard to breathe. They were experts in the art of the unintentional brush of shoulders in the elevator, the lingering handoff of a file. "Morning, Sarah," he said as he approached. His voice was a rich baritone, professional and detached for the benefit of any eavesdropping travelers. "Morning, Nate. Ready for the conference?" "Ready as I'll ever be." The words were a code. The conference was a fiction, a dry itinerary of leadership metrics designed to satisfy the corporate travel office. The reality was a private villa 3 hours away by air, tucked into a coastline where the only metrics that mattered were the ones they had been denying themselves for half a year. They were a conspiracy of two, walking toward the jet like two soldiers marching into a beautiful, inevitable battle. The cabin door hissed shut, sealing them into a world of beige leather and soft, ambient lighting. As the jet taxied toward the runway, the silence between them became a living thing. The flight attendant served 2 glasses of vintage champagne and, sensing the electric tension, retreated behind the cockpit curtain. Nate didn't look at her at first. He opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys. Sarah watched him. She knew the way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating, a small, sharp line between his eyes that she had spent countless meetings wanting to smooth over with her thumb. She took a long sip of the champagne. The bubbles were cold, but the liquid felt like fire in her throat. "You're still trying to work, Nate?" she asked. Her voice was lower now, the professional mask starting to slip. "We're over the clouds. The office can't find us here." Nate slowly closed the laptop. He leaned back, crossing one ankle over his knee. His eyes, usually guarded and sharp, were now dark with an intensity that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "I've been trying to read the same sentence for 20 minutes, Sarah," he admitted, his voice dropping an octave. "But all I can see is the way you're looking at me. All I can think about is that we have 3 hours of shared air, and for the first time I don't have to pretend I'm not thinking about you." Sarah closed her eyes and let the hum of the engines take her back. She remembered the first time she realized Nate wasn't just another executive. It was a Tuesday, 3 months ago. A sudden downpour had trapped them in the parking garage. The lights had flickered, leaving them in a dim, concrete cathedral. He had stood too close, just an inch too close. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something metallic, like rain on hot asphalt. He hadn't said anything, he had just watched the rain fall, but his hand had brushed hers as he reached for his keys. That small, accidental contact had felt like a lightning strike. Now, in the jet, that same electricity was back, but this time there was no rain to hide behind. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked. He had moved. He was no longer across the aisle. He was in the seat directly facing her, his knees nearly touching hers. "I'm thinking about that Tuesday in the garage," she whispered. "I'm thinking about how long we've been lying to everyone, including ourselves." Nate reached out. He didn't grab her hand, he simply let his fingers hover over her wrist, feeling the frantic skip of her pulse. "The lying ends today, Sarah. Up here, there are no titles, there is no hierarchy, there is only the truth." The fasten seatbelt sign extinguished with a soft chime. It was the signal they had both been waiting for. Sarah stood up. The movement was slow, a deliberate choreography of surrender. She walked across the narrow aisle until she was standing between his knees. The vibration of the jet's engines thrummed through her heels, a constant, low-frequency reminder of their isolation from the rest of humanity. She reached up and slowly unpinned her hair. The blonde strands fell around her shoulders in a messy golden curtain. The consummate professional was gone. "The professional persona is exhausting, isn't it?" she whispered. Nate's breath hitched. His hands, large and capable, gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly the leather groaned. He watched her, his gaze tracing the line of her neck, the curve of her jaw, with a hunger that was almost reverent. "I have spent 6 months wanting to do that," Nate said, his voice a jagged rasp. He stood up, towering over her in the small cabin. He didn't touch her yet. He let the tension build until it was an ache. "I have spent every boardroom wondering what you look like when you aren't trying to control the world." He reached out. His thumb traced her lower lip. It was a light touch, but it carried the weight of every unspoken word they had ever exchanged. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't a soft embrace, it was a collision. It was the sound of two people finally coming home after a very long, very cold journey. The turbulence of the flight began to pick up. As the plane jolted through a cloud bank, Sarah clung to his shoulders, her breath hitching against the crook of his neck. He was her anchor in the storm, his proprietary grip holding her steady even as the world tilted around them. They spoke in whispers, sharing secrets they had guarded for months. Nate talked about the pressure of the firm. Sarah talked about the loneliness of the climb. In the quiet of the cabin, they weren't just lovers, they were confidants. The sensation was of total fullness, not just physical, but emotional. Every movement was a confession. "I've wanted you since the first interview. I've wanted you since that rainy Tuesday in the garage." The world slowly returned to focus. The tires of the jet found the tarmac with a soft, distant thud. Sarah remained leaning against him for a long time, listening as their breathing synchronized. Nate leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "The conference hasn't even started yet, Sarah," he said with a smirk, "and I have a very long agenda planned for us." The black car pulled up to a secluded villa overlooking the Mediterranean. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and salt spray. As they stepped out, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. Nate led her inside, the heavy oak door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a new beginning. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't have to. The moonlight spilling through the balcony doors was enough. "Rule number 1 for the weekend," he murmured, pinning her gently against the door. "What's that?" "No more talking about work. From this moment until we board that plane to go home, we are just Nate and Sarah. No titles, no masks." "I think I can manage that." Sarah smiled, looping her arms around his neck.